Hi, a very good evening to all of you in India. Welcome to ISA India chapter. Today we have a lineup of having a webinar on applying TOGAF ACCM for business transformation. Today's speaker is Mr. Edwin, who is working for TCS and has uh, a lot of knowledge in terms of Microsoft technologies, open systems, and has been with Tata Consultancy Services since a long time. He is in the enterprise architecture COE in high-tech vertical as a consultant. He has spoken about this in open group seminars and other forums as well. This is an invited webinar wherein ISA India and ISA Global have requested Edwin Anand to share his knowledge and his educating us in terms of how effectively to use the maturity model for business transformations. Over to Mr. Edwin.
Thank you very much, Vinu, and a good evening to everyone joining from India. And my wishes are also to those if you're joining from elsewhere. But thank you for this opportunity to be a part of this event of ISA and to present and talk about this theme on applying TOGAF-based architecture capability maturity model for business transformation. And I hope to cover the session in the next 45 minutes and then spend little time hopefully over a discussion or a chat so that we could talk through the concept and delve a little into the subject of what it means and why are we talking about it. So on that note, to introduce myself, thanking Vinu for his kind introduction. I've been in the sustained myself, I should say, in the industry for about 16 years now. And I've been with TCS for the past 10 years. That's how I look. But I do converse on some of the social platforms that are out there. What I do want to tell of myself that's relevant to today's session is that I'm very passionate about architecture. And that passion has in my career led me to work today in leading what we have as an enterprise architecture center of excellence. That's the high-tech technology excellence group of TCS. I'm also a member of ISA since June of this year, so rather new to ISA, but I've been with TOGAF and the open group for quite some time. I've been certified in TOGAF 8.1 and I'm currently doing my 9.1 certification, but I deem myself to be a budding enterprise architect. I don't think I'm yet a full-fledged one. But what I'm also passionate about is to really share about architecture as I understand it with those around me, with the community of professionals, with students, with members in forums, and in that capacity I'm also an active member of the Association of Enterprise Architects in the Hyderabad chapter. I also created a meetup group, and I'm hoping to informally drive enterprise architecture with those who are interested in Hyderabad. That's where I live. And I'm also working from TCS to reach out to students, particularly with the vision of architecture. And what does it mean, and how does one prepare for this field of architecture? So that's what has led me to this session where I want to talk about the agenda a bit and what is the subject really that's on my mind to share, which I hope that by the end of it would be useful to you and you would at least have a couple of key takeaways in terms of enterprise architecture as a subject. Now, one of the things as I talk through this that pains me very much is the subject of architecture or even enterprise architecture is really confusing and is confused. Many times when we say enterprise architecture, we really try to glorify IT architecture or even technical architecture. And there's a very well-defined separation between technical versus solution versus enterprise architecture as a mainstream architecture function. And therefore, I do want to qualify that today's session is really talking at the level of what an enterprise architect would really deal with. And by that, I hope that I would also be able to impart some of my learnings on the difference between doing an IT architecture versus using an enterprise architecture. And what I want to do is really talk about business transformation and really share a very, very simple perspective around it. I'm not going to go into the depth of it. You know, it's one of those very complex subjects, but it's also the subjects that probably would be an enterprise architect would truly be tasked with. And that is the primary responsibility of an enterprise architect, that they transform business. And in doing so, while there are many methods and many ways of doing it, there is one tool that I found to be particularly effective, and that is the ACCM, which is a maturity model that can be used anywhere. It's very much like a scale. A scale can be used to both measure a building versus measure a person or measure anything else, or it could be used for various other purposes as well. A scale in its existence doesn't tell you how to use it. It's just there to help you along the journey. And therefore, much of my focus would be on trying to bring around this concept of a simple concept like a maturity model. How useful will that be even in doing something as complex as business transformation? And that's going to be my focus, and that's what I hope to present to you. And I do want to mention a real-life case study that I have been involved in that kind of talks through the same concepts as to how I had applied it and what did I do in there. So with that, I think if there's a scope for time, I want to keep it to the 1 hour that's given to me. And if there is scope, we would love to do transformation. And there's a little Dilbert for us to keep the spirit a little humorous and down. I think we don't want to get overly thirst up in this discussion. So having said that, I'm going to start now by drawing a little bit of a perspective on business transformation and talking through it. Business transformation really is an effort in which, you know, I was humorously telling a colleague of mine today that there's one thing common about business transformation and developing countries, and that is that the two of them, we never know when they will end, be it transformation or be it developing, right? So to me, it's a process. It's a continuous process, really. But what, and it is that process we really try to discover and really streamline as part of an enterprise architecture initiative. And how I look at it is really, I want to start by setting a perspective around this business transformation and really what does it mean. So there is, to me, an outside-in motivation to perform transformation of your business. And what I mean by that is, you look at your business and the way it is being conducted, and then you think of what is the fundamental change I must make to the business in order to gain a competitive advantage. And what I'm really trying to do there is, I really want to place my business from an external perspective and make it to be in a competitive place. I don't want to lose out on the competitiveness of my business. I don't want to be in a place where in the macroscopic level, I'm actually left behind and everyone else has moved forward. And that could entail taking an outside-in view. I mean, from the outside, you really look at what's happening around you, what's the markets really, where is it going, where's technology moving, what's happening in the knowledge base, where are people going, and where is the world economics, where does it move, and what are the new innovations that are around us. And so many different perspectives drive a lot of transformational exercises that businesses and organizations would commit themselves to take up. And in that sense, there is an outside-in motivation. And by the same token, conversely, there is an inside-out motivation. So that which comes from within the organization. And this is really driven by a paradigm shift in the way an organization begins to sense and respond to the changes in industry. And it really wants to move in the same dimensions as an outside-in view in terms of trying to be agile, adaptable, flexible, intelligent, and all the 9 yards of it. But I think it is basically the way you look at yourself is going to be different. It's going to be radically different from how you were looking at yourself earlier. And this is particularly true. I mean, I can cite Microsoft as an organization, where Microsoft called itself a products company for a long time. And now they would call themselves as a services company that is enabling services through its products. And that's a paradigm shift, and that is actually letting them do a lot more than what they did before. I have seen TCS transform itself from being just an IT company to a radically different services company that has grown to not only 300,000 people, but it's also changing the way it operates. So that's what I mean by an inside-out motivation. Speaking about companies that are close to my heart, and there are many more who are constantly making a transition. But both of these entail a real business transformation. And both of these entail a change that must take place in the organization. And what it really translates to is it really gets into doing an enterprise-wide change or an initiative, I would call it. It translates to an EA initiative that will significantly impact an organization. And there are two broad ways that will impact it. One, it will sustain your competitive advantage. That's the real objective of any business transformation any company would entail in. And second, it modernizes and keeps an enterprise up to date. Meaning you don't age, you actually change and redefine yourself and become relevant to the context of the modern world around us. And that could be the redefinition of your very core services that you offer, or it could be a new avatar that a company takes or diversifies into different new arenas, and it can come in many different ways. So the way to do the transformation is really going to be an outcome of a true enterprise architecture exercise. And at this point, I don't have too many slides, but I hope that I'm able to communicate these thoughts effectively in spite of the lack of slides. But what I really want to say is that when an enterprise or an organization submits itself or commits itself to a business transformation initiative, they really are talking about big changes that or big or small changes or changes that's going to orient them or face them towards a future readiness and towards benefits, not just in the near term and medium term, but also definitely over the long term. And that's really the key aspiration behind business transformation, especially from an enterprise architecture perspective. And at this time, I do want to make a mention of this word enterprise architecture and how is it different. Architecture fundamentally is the art and science of structures. How does one structure a given area of focus or a problem area or a problem space or what one is set out to solve? And that application of that definition can be made to different scopes that are there. So if you retain the scope to technical areas, which could be around .NET or Java or Oracle or an ERP system, it could even be a platform, it really, what you're trying to do is play the role of a technical architect. But if you take the scope a little higher in the abstraction and try to bundle it into solving a problem in a technology agnostic manner, meaning you're trying to just speak to a solution. How would you solve a particular problem without necessarily getting into the technical details? That's who a solution architect is. But when you extend the scope of your architecture, which again is a science and art of structures, that is, you need to structure your thought process and problem solving to the entire enterprise. And when I say I'm talking of an enterprise, it's not just IT. It is way beyond IT. It is all about business. And that is when the scope of your architecture grows much broader than merely IT or solutioning. And that's where a true enterprise architect, or generally it's a team of them. I don't think there's one person or two people who would, I think there are, but that's more rare than a commonplace. And it's always good to have a team of people, because the scope of an enterprise as a whole is very, very, very complicated. And somebody needs to have the big picture and the holistic perspective, and that's who an enterprise architect really is. So having said that, and that's how it is relevant to the transformation, now the question becomes, how does one begin to do a transformation? Well, I'm not going to talk of how does one do business transformation. I don't think that's going to be the core forte. But what I'm really going to focus on today is, given that there is a need and there is a very real activity under the banner of enterprise architecture to perform a business transformation, I want to introduce to you the architecture capability maturity model as defined by the open group in the TOGAF framework. And given link there that hopefully would you can even Google for it. But it is very simple in terms of what it says. And my focus is to explain how the simple paradigm can be applied in going about doing a business transformation. Now, here is where I must detach myself from a specific business transformation exercise. I'm not going to try to talk to you about how exactly you do a transformation, but I'm going to talk more about when you do a transformation, how would you use this model, or the simple scale as I call it, to measure your transformation exercise and to go about in a logical and a structured manner in performing a transformation exercise. So hopefully that statement will clarify itself when you go forward. It'll also, I hope, I set the right expectation. So let's look back at this table that is beamed on your screen. Well, there is on the first column a score. And what this score really does is, it tries to tell you that there is a number that you can attach to speak, to indicate the maturity of what you're trying to measure. And in this case, it's the enterprise. So now we are thinking as an enterprise architect, but you can apply it to anything you want. If you're a technical architect, you can apply it to the maturity of the technical system that you're trying to evaluate. It could be a software system. It could be your it could be, for example, a technology component. It could be anything. But there's a score there that you can attach to to indicate the maturity that a particular system has taken place. And it can be applied even to an entire organization. And if you recall, this maturity model really is not new. It is coming from the capability maturity model, CMMI, that has been long designed by SEI. But what it also does, it gives a clear-cut meaning to what that number means. So 0 means there is no enterprise enablement program to speak about, whereas 5 means it is under a continual improvement program. Your enterprise architecture or mechanisms are continually under improvement. So it's at the peak stage and it's performing very, very, very well. Now, what does the scale really do for us? So here's another perspective. We are talking of perspectives in the slide. The first thing I want us to understand is, you need a tool like this or a model like this to really help you measure. You really need to know what is true. And this question of what is truth is a very, very subjective question at times. That is why you need a scale. That is why you need a way of saying that if you make any measure or evaluation, then all of us need to look at the same kind of measuring scale in order to perform it. And that's where standardization comes in. So the ACCM stands as a means to provide standardization and acceptance in an enterprise. And that's the first thing I want to impress upon us. The second thing I want to talk about is, this can be used to evaluate. So you definitely have a way of standardizing or speaking to an enterprise, meaning if you say, I'm at maturity 3, then you know that, okay, that means I'm underdeveloped. That's standardizing. But you also need to find a way to evaluate, meaning you now have something to try and measure against. And that is, you need to find a way to put yourself in one of these numbers. And that's what is the evaluation process that kind of tells you, where am I today? Where do I stand today? And that is another way in which you can look at a tool. And now you know that where you stand in your as is. And if you want to be transformed into a to be state, then this can also be used to measure that transformation along the way. And therefore, it is also, in a way, a transformation tool, meaning it will tell you what are the things I need to do in order to go from 2 to 3 or 2 to 4. That's the kind of analysis you can also do simply by using a tool like this. And this basically gives you a foundation on which you can build and measure yourself. And in that sense, that's the concept of the capability model that we are talking about. So we talked of business transformation as to what it means in terms of trying to change an organization for its better. And then we talked of the capability model as the means to do that. And again, I reiterate, we are not going to talk of how exactly to do that. We're going to touch upon how we use the tool. And in that sense, we're going to go forward. So having said that, now I want to talk a little about, you know, as enterprise architects, I think we all love graphs, right? So here's a graph that I want to use to kind of explain to you how do these two things come together. So on one side, you have an enterprise. You're an enterprise architect. You definitely want to, you definitely want to understand how an enterprise really works, and you want to see how transformations can be applied. Good. And you also have a model to do that now. Now, in this graph, I'm trying to put them both together. So how do we understand transformation initiatives? First of all, for any transformation initiative you undertake in the enterprise, there is a scope defined as to what would be the scope of the transformation. And transformations can be made at different levels altogether, okay? And then there is a value that it can generate. For example, you can focus only on your IT organization. And let's say IT cost today, cost of IT is, let's say some 20 million a year. That's the budget given for IT. Now, low value IT transformation may really mean you have taken up an initiative, something like maybe you want to, build a new system, okay? And that could probably give you some business. But holistically, from a transformation perspective, what value will it bring? Maybe not much. It doesn't really transform, it will just sustain your business and make you work. So that's an example of the value of the transformation will be low, and the value of your the focus or the scope of the transformation will also be either only on IT or a departmental kind of an exercise. And that's what I call as the survival mode of enterprise initiatives. So anything you do in that space, you are really trying to do to survive, which falls under the bucket of low value and departmentally scoped initiatives. And it can be IT, it can be HR, it can be anything. Typically, a company that is focusing only on these, or an enterprise that's focusing or spending all its energies on these, you can definitely say that its maturity will perhaps fall between 1 and 2 somewhere. It is either at an initial state, or if you're doing it very well, you're trying to do, it is slightly in an underdeveloped state. Okay, that's where is the survival side of it. Now, if you increase the scope a little more and try to generate a little more value, now what could that be? For example, I might be trying to now bring in new capabilities into my IT organization to help the business. Now we are talking a little about business, right? So let's say I've been using my in-house data centers. Now I want to put everything on the cloud, and I want to do an infrastructure transformation, or I want to undertake an outsourcing exercise, or I want to undertake maybe an insourcing exercise or a consolidation exercise of my applications. Now, these are some initiatives that are all driven within the scope of IT, but the value that they generate from a transformational point may be great, because not only are you going to get benefits in the immediate term, but supposing you move to the cloud, tomorrow the speed at which you can make changes on your infrastructure can be really, really quick and fast. That means you're also preparing for a future transformation. Therefore, the value for it can really be little more than simply doing a new application. And therefore, those are what we call as when an organization moves from the survival mode to the revival mode, then you begin to see these kind of transformations. And typically, these organizations are slightly getting into a better positioning of their maturity. And that's where you begin to see organizations in the defined mode or the managed mode. And as you can see, this is what I call as the maturity circles, and these circles increase in their scope and reach, and even in the good feel that they give in terms of the numbers that they present. And then finally, you have what we call as the transformational. And transformational initiatives always touch and change the business that you live in. And this is something that that only comes with years of discipline and having a very disciplined enterprise architecture practice, or even a business transformation initiative that can help the entire organization optimize itself and be ready for a future change. And that is how transformation, as it moves forward, can be measured with a maturity model. And this is the perspective that we need to carry as enterprise architects who are trying to bring in a perspective around transformation. So having said that, I now want to focus a little on an example of how does one do transformation. Well, I'm not really going to go too much into details here, but everybody needs a methodology for a transformation. So I have used the one that we have internally, which is called the 5D transformation methodology in TCS. I'm not here to advertise or talk about it, but I want to give you an example of how every organization will adopt its own. But fundamentally, it will be under at least the categories that you see there. So there is the 5 Ds are determine, design, develop, deploy, and deliver. And that's really 5-click. But what you really need to do as a methodology is you need to envision your transformation. You need to perform the transformation, and then you need to realize the benefits. It's as simple as that. And it's a very simple paradigm, but there needs to be some structured way of going about with the transformation. In fact, I didn't bring in the TOGAF wheel here because this is really a forum for ISA, but TOGAF does the transformation through its ADM methodology, and that's another example. Zachman does it with its own ontology of its own framework. So everybody's got a methodology that helps deliver business transformation value. And as enterprise architects, when we master a methodology, when we begin to understand it, absorb it, and transform ourselves through it, that is when we can use it to transform the organizations that we work with. So pick any one, and I've just used one as an example here. But having said that, that's the perspective as enterprise architects we need to carry when we think of business transformation, and then using a maturity model to measure where you're going along the way. Now, I'm going to move to the second section of this presentation, which is really going to talk about how does this tool really help? And to do that, I'm going to talk a little about how does one think of performing a business transformation. So here we are talking, let me forget about business transformation for a second and talk about it as an enterprise architecture initiative, right? So I want to now use this model as the means to perform the transformation. So for that, I've just opened up a picture here, and this is the first picture I'd like to keep in mind. It looks rather complicated, but as an enterprise architect, we should first be able to measure our own enterprise. When you know where you stand today and you can give it a number, then for any business transformation initiative you would take upon yourself to do, you would also be able to then say, if I do this transformation, where does it put me on the maturity scale? And that becomes a very important question to ask. So if you want to give a number to the organization, you must first be able to at least structure your organization in some form. And therefore, you need to envision the earlier one I talked about, envision and transform and realize, right? So in these three paradigms, this model can help you establish that vision. And to do that establishing purpose, we need to keep the enterprise in mind. Now, here, if you look at how a typical enterprise really looks like, what you have right in the middle of this diagram is the business viewpoint. How does one look at an enterprise from a business perspective? See, from a business standpoint, you have core business functions and you have supporting organizations in which IT is one of them. Okay, there are many other business organizations. Therefore, those of us who are focused on IT architecture, we need to understand architecture is not only about IT. Enterprise architecture especially not. You might be doing enterprise IT architecture, that is IT architecture that touches the whole enterprise. But if you remember the scale I talked to you about, you need to also understand that those initiatives, when they scope it, that wouldn't result into necessarily a business transformation. It could impact business positively, but that's where you need to understand. But the reason I say that is, when a business looks at the whole enterprise, it really looks at what is my core functionality, what is it that I really do well, what is my core offering to my competitors and my customers and my suppliers and my government and other things, right? So there is a structure to it. And then there are underlying processes that drive my business. And together, that is what is called the value chain, the least set of processes and methods and steps that I would need in order to successfully deliver my business functions. That's a value chain. And then there is IT enablement that comes right at the bottom. That's the way business looks at it. Now the management looks at it from a different perspective. Management is really bothered around who are my players that I'm going to use my business for or going to use my business structures for. What should be my governance around it? What should be my vision, mission, my objectives, my values, my processes, my policies, my KPIs, and my monitoring, compliancy, legal, and all of that, right? And then how do I institute change? How do I'm today here, and constantly I'll be affected in my organization. How do I manage that change? So these are at least the three dimensions of a management viewpoint. And finally, there is an IT viewpoint that stands out because IT is the most powerful enabler, which many businesses deem as a necessary evil. Okay, but that's where IT is, notoriously good. And in that capacity, IT deserves an IT viewpoint. And IT really is talking of what are the key IT capabilities that my organization really needs. And when I say capability, I'm not talking of a system. I'm really talking of enablement. And there could be ERP, there has to be a CRM, there has to be asset management, and all the 9 yards. Okay, it depends really on the IT capabilities are really going to be driven by the business you do. And then supporting those capabilities or enabling those capabilities are the IT systems. And underneath is the IT infrastructure that holds all of your integrations, your data, your software, and everything else. There's the IT infrastructure. So that's the IT viewpoint of looking at the organization. Now the reason you structure or look at this enterprise reference model is when you think of the enterprise in this manner, it becomes easy to measure. So how does that entail? So look at this picture here that I brought up. Now you are trying to measure your organization. So when you measure your organizations, you start measuring the various viewpoints by their maturity. Now in this example, the graph and the table are really the same thing. They are represented differently. If you look at this carefully, on the first column it says enterprise maturity. It is defining the enterprise by the various dimensions involved. And then, depending on the initiative you take, you would be giving a certain weightage to a particular dimension of the enterprise. So typically, here in this example, I'm trying to show an arrow in which if you are focused on an IT assessment, IT-focused EA assessment, then there are many dimensions that you switch off in an enterprise. And therefore, you don't score them. And therefore, you get a limited perspective of the enterprise. And that's what I think I was trying to say earlier in the graph that I showed you. And here, what you're really trying to do is you look at, in this case, an IT application portfolio, meaning you look at all your applications, you look at redundancies, you look at cost, you look at possible transformations in there and all the 9 yards of it. That's really called the application portfolio rationalization. And then you look at integrations as an enabler, you look at all the ways in which you can integrate. Should I use cloud? Should I use a private cloud? Should I use enterprise APIs to do my integration? How do I do single sign-on? And how should an enterprise service bus look like? Should I use service orientation as against a layered architecture style? What should be the way in which I think all of this comes under that kind of facet? And then comes the data integrity, the data what is that called, the data management area of the enterprise. How do I have a single source of truth? How can I combine the various sources of data? How can I ensure that they all have the same data elements and things like that? And these days, the latest trend around data is data virtualization. So there's a whole lot of technology that you cover, but you don't necessarily focus on the other dimensions of the enterprise. But effectively, what we end up doing is we try to find out these dimensions of the enterprise, how do they translate into the second level and the third level and the fourth level and the fifth level. It can go to any level of depth that you want to comprehensively do a study on. And that's what your IT architects and your solution architects will define for you, that for a given enterprise, for a given dimension of that enterprise, what are the underlying characteristics that can be measured? For example, can I look at the, in the IT-enabled processes, can I look at a list of all the processes and their maturity? And that means I need to probably go down to study the IT enablement process from a, IT process. How effective are they? How are they being done? So that's really an audit exercise. And it could even go into the system level information. So are my IT systems, is there value in using them? And how is their serviceability? How is their maintainability? How is their functionality? Is it relevant? Is it old? How good is that? So there has to be some way of measuring it. And finally, that needs to roll up into a score, and it must be weighted, because every organization can decide, well, I may not want to focus today too much upon a particular dimension, so I will give it less weightage, but other dimensions are more important, so I'll give it more weightage. So that's going to give you a weighted average, which will finally tell you where does my enterprise stand. And this is the way we apply the capability model to an enterprise in doing any kind of a transformation exercise. So the next picture here is really a full-blown enterprise business-focused EA transformation. You could look at all the dimensions of an enterprise, weigh them correctly, put scores to it by measuring it, and it is that measurement exercise which is the core business transformation exercise, and that's what will change from company to company. That's the skill of a consultant, and that's where the core work on the transformation. So I'm not going to necessarily touch on that, but I want to talk, my focus is really on this maturity model. How can that be used in conducting a business transformation? So having said that, now I want to take you through this a different perspective of the whole thing as a transformation tool. We talked of envisioning. So how do you envision? And now comes the question of, now that you envisioned, how do you do the transformation? So in order to do the transformation, you need to look at the various dimensions. You need to look at where together where in the quadrant does it fit, and you also need to look at the risk that the enterprise carries by being in that state, and that is what is the current risk all about. These are the things you need to articulate as part of your transformation exercise that needs to be presented to your business users, saying, look, the exercise we have taken, it might be low in cost. In fact, if it's low in cost, then it's typically low in scope as well. So you can call it as scope of initiatives, as we have seen earlier, but cost of initiatives is very good as well, because in the transformation thought process, you look at value to cost to risk. These are the three things that you try to measure. What is the cost, what is the value it delivers, and at what risk? These three things are going to be pragmatic and required for any transformation exercise. And then you try to also say, okay, this is where I stand today with a risk, but if I increase my cost of investment a little, I get higher value and my risk is controlled, and this is how my maturity will look like if I move certain initiatives up. And if I put much more effort into and cost into the transformation exercise, then this is where my risk will be, and this is how my whole enterprise picture will look like. So this is a way in which you can use your maturity model as a way to help you speak through business transformations that you need to deliver to your customers and to your to people who are recipients of your work. And having said that, and then this is realization side of the story, and you realize your benefits by trying to look by the viewpoint and then categorizing each one of the initiatives you may want to take. And if you do the ones in blue, it may put you at 2. If you do in the light yellow, then you get into 3, and then into 4, and then into 5. So this is how you could represent the various realization viewpoints to your management to talk through the initiatives that they must focus on in order to get you there. And that in essence is what I really wanted to focus on, and then I'll take another 5 minutes to wrap up and then open it up for any questions if you may have any. But do want to talk about a case study that I've been involved in. What we had to do really was, we had a customer in which we were asked to do an IT landscape of the business system and really define at a high level what is the EA enterprise architecture picture really looking like. So if you look at it without any of what I've said, then you might jump into creating a diagram. It's not about the diagram. It's about a measure. It's about a way of speaking about an organization which is there. And in this exercise, they also asked us to do an ERP evaluation, which is a secondary aspect in terms of this presentation. But what was expected out of this as an outcomes is, they wanted the current IT landscape to be defined clearly. They wanted to understand their IT enablement within their core business areas. They also wanted to know the future state architecture blueprint, and for that you need to tell them what it would cost and how would you give a roadmap to reach there. Okay, so that's really the exercise all about. I'm sure that as enterprise architects in your own fields, you will also be getting into these kind of areas. And what we delivered in the end is an enterprise architecture reference model that I talked to you about. That's what we used in order to build the whole thoughts around it. We talked about their IT landscape in terms of their maturity of their IT enablement. We focused on IT, but we said your IT is enabling your business in this manner, and here's the number for it. And we gave them measures on how we measured. And then we also talked about the target state IT, where should they be for their kind of an organization. That's based on market research. And then we talked of the roadmap in order to reach there. So that's really what the exercise was. The case study was talking about that. And I'm not going to go too much into the details for confidentiality reasons, but I just want to let you know that it is very similar to what I talked to you about. And in this case, it came to really about 2.5. And these numbers, you shouldn't be surprised if you see them. You'll never get a perfect number, but it is always an advice that you need to give basing on that. And in this case, we gave our findings saying that there are certain things you need to do by the various dimensions, and that's what we said, that you need to also benchmark an organization and tell them that this is where you ought to be for your size and your work that you do. And that's what is this last statement reflecting. But then against each one of the dimensions that we've evaluated, we gave them a score and told them where are their weaknesses really and where should they place their focus on. And we also gave them a cost-benefit analysis of their current IT systems that are there. So by system, we looked at a couple of it in terms of the total cost of ownership, future readiness, and manageability and service delivery. Those again we split by various other parameters, but we did a fair evaluation and we created a decision matrix that kind of told us that if the cost versus the benefit, if it falls in a certain range, then what should be the decision on it? And that drove the decision making on deciding which application stays versus which one goes. And that's what we tried to then put together into a holistic recommendation in terms of what we have seen. So that's been the analysis side of it. And then when we went about with our presentation, we said that there are certain things you could do in order to move your organization upward. And we gave it these standard terms that we use in the organization, that you need to move up in terms of your maturity and in terms of your focus as well. So that's it, and I hope that it has been interesting to you. Here's a little Dilbert to reflect again, and I do hope that I'm not the Dilbert here, but I'm open to your questions if you have any.
Yeah, I suggest, Edwin, I suggest that people can actually post the questions through chat or through click on the question mark, and they can send it out to us and we can answer that.
Fair enough, fair enough. And let me see if I have any questions on the chat. Yeah, I have not yet seen any questions on the chat, but
yeah, I think there is not many questions. In the meantime, just let me take a moment of Edwin in terms of a course being conducted at Bangalore later in December, between December 15th and 19th. This was the budding architect core program. So I have sent out some of the details on the chat. Those who are interested can contact me or email me on this. If you have questions, the slides and the webinar recording will be made available shortly, and the link will be sent across to all of you in the email. So feel free that at any given point of time, you can address through our blogs, our emails, and any communication to get any clarification from me or Edwin. That will be fantastic as well.
all right.
Okay, so let me just thank Edwin. Edwin, it was fantastic hearing you share your experience in terms of the maturity model. I have had a couple of scenarios wherein I felt there was a model essential for identifying the maturity of an organization wherever we work in as an architect. And this was really a knowledge sharing session which gave us, in terms of measuring the capability matrix and ability of the organization on the various maturity levels was really a fantastic. Thanks, Edwin, for your share session today.
Thanks, Vinu, for having me. I hope it was useful for everyone as well.
So thank you very much, all of you, for having spent your time, and I hope, I think there are a couple of hand raised, one by Bala. Let me just look at that. Bala, is it possible for you to share your question? Okay, yeah. Edwin, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Vinu.
Yeah, so Bala says, do you think there is a scope to enhance this model further? And what is the future work you are planning in this space? Can you explain your thoughts?
Okay, so is there a scope to enhance this model further? Sure there is, because what I really talked about is really a standard way of measuring. There are two areas that I was thinking about. One is when we do scoring, today we use a weighted average. And weighted average is really a very flat way of defining a parameter. I was always intrigued by trying to do something using a statistical model. I haven't figured it out. You actually need a lot of data before you can do that. But I believe that to arrive at a maturity number, you need not only do a weighted average. You can do it in any way. And I believe that a statistical modeling approach is actually going to be more useful, provided an organization has the right data around it. In terms of what we could do, I think I wouldn't talk all the 9 yards of what I want to do in TCS, but in terms of IASA and what our vision, at least for IASA is, I first want to ensure that this can be practically applied in your own spheres of work. So in that capacity, reach out to any one of us, Vinu or myself or anyone who has done this before, and if you're trying to seek help in your own engagements, I'd definitely like to ensure that this model, which is my work, can actually be useful to someone else. And that relates back to the passion I talked about earlier. I also have a meetup group in Hyderabad, and if you guys, any of you are in Hyderabad and you'd like to be a part of it, you're most welcome to participate there and be a part there. So that in terms of
Edwin, just to hold on, there are a couple of more questions as well. One from Vishwarupa says, on the case study, it looks like more of an IT transformation. Can you shed some light on the business outcome, business transformation side of it? That is one. And also related with the case study, Puneet Bhatia wanted to know how did you arrive at precise figures?
Oh, arrived at what figures, I'm sorry?
The precise figures like 2.52.
Okay. So let me take the first question. You're very right. It is driven by the CIO of the organization, and therefore it has been an IT enablement exercise. And that's what I had talked about when I talked of the scope as well. But the method and the madness to it is definitely envisaging the entire IT scope and entire business scope. You can apply it anywhere in business. So the business side of the transformation, we didn't really focus on because that was not our scope. It firstly requires a lot of domain knowledge. You really need to understand your customer's domain, and they are the masters of it. But what we also did is we tried to talk around it by speaking through the ERP platform and how that integrated whole can actually deliver to them the business value that they're looking for. So you're right in your observation, and that's very accurate. The second part of how did we get at the 2.52 numbers and all that, we have our templates that we have developed, which clearly break down the dimension into the next level. And at some point, we come to a level that is close enough, or a level that is, let me say, it's not very abstract. It is actually very practical. For example, in a technical exercise, I may look at the code quality as one of the parameters that I'm measuring as part of my exercise. That rolls up into a higher metric, and that metric finally reaches this dimension, and that's how I get my score. And in there too, I may be doing a weighted average. So it's all around breaking it down, breaking high-level abstraction more concrete.
Fantastic. Manish Chandra asks, ACMM being applicable across industries. In the ACMM, is the score scale same across industries? And related with that, Praveen also asked whether it can be applied to services or product development.
Absolutely, yes. If you understood the concept, yes. The dimensions of the enterprise remain the same. The way you measure it may change according to the scope and the context of what you're trying to do.
Fantastic. Thanks everyone for your interactive involvement in our webinar. Thanks again, Edwin, for clarifying our doubts. And let's hope to meet again either on the next Tuesday or Thursday. I will be sharing across with you some of the other interesting webinar topics that we have in ISA India. And please do visit our website, isaglobal.org, and visit India chapter. Become members and partake in our activities. Thanks very much. Have a very nice evening. Bye.
Thank you, Venu. Thanks, everyone. Bye.